Some roads disappear for a reason. Route 117 vanished from maps, but something beneath it is still alive. This story begins where the road ends. Subscribe, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from. Old Route 117 no longer existed on any official map, but the desert had not forgotten it. The cracked ribbon of asphalt still cut through the New Mexico wasteland, like a scar that refused to heal, stretching between dry hills and empty sky. Faded road signs leaned at awkward angles, their paint burned pale by decades of sun. Wind dragged sand across the surface in thin, whispering lines, slowly burying what little remained of the road's markings. At night, when the temperature dropped and the air grew still, the place felt suspended in time, as if the world had moved on and left this stretch behind by mistake. Thomas Reed knew the road better than anyone. He had grown up alongside it, watched traffic thin year after year until the engines stopped coming altogether. The new highway had been built miles away, straighter and faster, pulling life with it. Businesses closed, families left, and Route 117 slipped into obscurity. By the time Thomas inherited the old gas station from his father, the road was already considered dead. But dead roads still collected stories, and Thomas had learned that silence did not mean safety. The gas station squatted beside the road like a stubborn survivor. One rusted pump still worked if you coaxed it long enough. The small garage smelled of oil, dust, and old rubber. A sun-bleached sign above the building still read, "Gas," though only a few letters clung to the metal frame. Thomas fixed engines for ranchers, drifters, and the occasional lost traveler who ignored modern maps. It was not a life he had chosen, so much as one he had remained in after everything else fell apart. After his father died, Thomas stayed because leaving felt like betrayal. His mother had gone east years earlier, chasing work and distance. He stayed because the land was familiar, because the tools still fit his hands, because the road was all he had left that felt permanent. Every month the bills stacked higher, and every month he told himself things would stabilize. They never did. The first time the truck stalled, Thomas blamed the heat. The desert sun was unforgiving, and old engines complained when pushed too hard. It happened exactly 2 miles north of the station, where the road dipped slightly between two low ridges. The engine cut out without warning. No sputter. No warning lights. Just silence. Thomas cursed, coasted to a stop, and waited. After less than a minute, the engine turned over like nothing had happened. He drove on, uneasy but unconcerned. The second time it felt deliberate. Same spot, same sudden death. This time Thomas checked everything. Fuel line, battery connections, ignition. Nothing was wrong. The truck restarted again on its own, obedient and calm. He drove home with the windows down, listening harder than usual, trying to convince himself he was imagining patterns that were not there. By the third time, he stopped denying it. The engine died the instant his tires crossed an invisible point on the road. Thomas sat behind the wheel, heart beating faster than it should have, staring out at the empty desert. There was no interference tower nearby, no visible structure, nothing that could explain it. When the truck restarted again, Thomas drove back to the station without finishing his errand. That evening, his sister Lily arrived. She was younger by 7 years and carried the kind of restlessness Thomas recognized too well. She had come for the summer, she said, needed space, needed quiet. Thomas did not ask questions. Family had learned to leave things unspoken. Lily noticed the road immediately. She always had an eye for details Thomas had learned to ignore. On her second day, she rode with him in the truck when the engine stalled again. She did not panic. She did not laugh it off. "That's not normal," she said, watching the desert beyond the windshield. "It's always here?" "Always here," Thomas answered. She asked him to stop. They stepped out into the heat. Lily walked a slow circle around the truck, then followed the edge of the road. She crouched near a half-buried signpost, brushing sand away with her hands. That was when she saw it. A metal ring, dull and worn, barely visible beneath the sand. It did not belong to the road. It was too solid, too intentional. Lily tugged at it gently. It did not move. Thomas felt a tightening in his chest as he joined her. He knelt, brushing sand aside until the outline of a circular metal hatch emerged. The surface was scarred and discolored, but intact. Whatever it was, it had been there a long time. They exchanged a look that said neither of them wanted to speak first. The desert wind picked up, hissing softly over the asphalt. The road stretched away behind them, empty and forgotten. Thomas realized that the silence felt heavier than before, as if something beneath their feet had finally been noticed. He covered the ring again, smoothing sand over it with his boot. "We'll come back later," he said. Lily nodded, but her eyes never left the spot. That night, Thomas lay awake in the small room behind the garage, listening to the wind push against the building. The road outside was invisible in the darkness, but he could feel it there, waiting. The engine stalls replayed in his mind, each one lining up perfectly with the next. He thought about the ring beneath the sand and the way the truck had gone quiet, as if commanded to stop. Route 117 had been abandoned, erased from maps and memory, but something beneath it was still alive, still active, still capable of reaching out. And for the first time in years, Thomas Reed felt certain that staying might be more dangerous than leaving. They returned to the spot early the next morning, before the sun climbed high enough to turn the desert into an open furnace. The air was cool, almost fragile, and the silence felt sharper than the night before. Thomas parked the truck a safe distance away, unwilling to risk another stall directly over whatever lay buried beneath the road. Neither of them spoke much as they walked back to the place Lily had marked in her memory. Words felt unnecessary now. The unease had settled too deeply. Lily was the first to kneel. She brushed the sand away again, slower this time, more carefully, as if afraid the object might disappear if handled too roughly. The metal ring reappeared, exactly where it had been, unchanged by the night. Thomas fetched a shovel from the truck. The sound of steel biting into packed sand echoed strangely across the empty land, too loud, too sharp, as though the desert itself were listening. The hatch revealed itself inch by inch. It was circular, thick and reinforced, its edges sealed tight against the sand. Faint scratches marked its surface, not random damage, but signs of repeated handling long ago. There were no symbols, no warnings, no writing of any kind, just metal and weight and intention. When Thomas pulled on the ring, it resisted, then shifted with a dull groan that vibrated through the ground. A breath of cooler air escaped from below, carrying a smell that didn't belong to the open desert. Oil, dust, something older, enclosed. Lily froze, eyes wide, as the hatch creaked open far enough to reveal darkness beneath. A ladder descended into the earth. They stood there for a long moment, staring down into the void. Thomas felt a tightening in his stomach, a warning he had learned not to ignore. This wasn't a storm cellar or a drainage system. Whatever waited below had been built with purpose, and purpose meant people. Against his better judgment, Thomas climbed down first. The ladder was cold beneath his hands, the metal slick with age. The light above shrank quickly as he descended, replaced by a dim gray glow that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. When his boots touched solid ground, he realized the space below was larger than he'd expected. Lily followed, her breathing shallow, her movements cautious. They stood inside a concrete corridor that stretched forward into darkness. The walls were smooth but stained, marked by time and moisture. The ceiling was low enough to make Thomas hunch slightly as he walked. The air was stale but breathable, and beneath the dust lingered the unmistakable scent of machinery. They moved slowly, every step measured. Their footsteps echoed, bouncing back at them in distorted fragments. As their eyes adjusted, details emerged. Metal rails ran along the floor, partially buried beneath debris. Not train tracks, but something similar, narrower, designed for carts or containers. The corridor extended farther than Thomas could see, bending gently away. "This wasn't abandoned in a hurry," Lily whispered. "Someone planned this." They followed the corridor deeper, guided by instinct, more than light. After several minutes, they reached a wider section where the tunnel opened into a reinforced chamber. Stacked against one wall were large metal containers, uniform in size and shape, sealed tight. They were unmarked, smooth except for faint serial numbers stamped into their sides. No logos, no labels. What unsettled Thomas most was the dust. Wasn't undisturbed. Footprints crossed the floor, fresh enough to still hold their shape. Boot prints, heavy soles. Not old, not decades past. Someone had been here recently, moving between the containers, stopping, turning back. Thomas crouched, pressing his fingers into one of the prints. The sand beneath was firm. Hours, maybe a day, not longer. Lily looked around nervously, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. "We're not alone," she said quietly. They moved on, deeper still, until the corridor ended at a sealed door, reinforced with steel panels and thick bolts. Nearby stood equipment Thomas recognized only vaguely. Generators, cables, junction boxes. Old, but not primitive. Maintained just enough to remain functional. A low hum filled the space, so faint it could easily be mistaken for imagination. Thomas felt it more than he heard it, a vibration that traveled through the soles of his boots and into his bones. This place was not dead. He reached out, touching the side of one generator. It was warm. They didn't open anything. They didn't touch the containers. The presence of recent activity changed everything. Curiosity gave way to caution. Whatever this place had been built for, it was still important to someone. They climbed back to the surface in silence. As Thomas sealed the hatch and smoothed sand back into place, a distant sound carried across the desert. An engine. Not his truck. Lily turned toward the road instinctively, her posture stiffening. From the ridge to the south, a vehicle approached slowly, deliberate in its movement. Black. Modern. No markings. It stopped far enough away to observe, close enough to be intentional. Thomas felt the weight of the moment settle heavily on his shoulders. The road had been forgotten, but what lay beneath it clearly had not. The black vehicle remained where it was, engine idling softly, its presence heavy against the open desert. Thomas stood beside the road, his body tense, his thoughts racing. Lily stayed close to him, her eyes fixed on the distant shape, as if staring might force it to retreat. The wind carried the low rumble of the engine toward them, steady and patient, as though whoever sat inside knew exactly how this would end. After several long seconds, the vehicle began to move again. It rolled forward at an unhurried pace, tires crunching over loose gravel, stopping just short of the buried hatch. The driver's door opened first. A man stepped out, dressed too neatly for the desert, his shirt clean, his boots barely scuffed. He closed the door gently, deliberately, and adjusted his sunglasses before looking directly at Thomas. "Morning," the man said, his voice calm, practiced. "Hot day to be digging around out here." Thomas did not answer. He noticed immediately what the man did not say. He did not ask what they were doing. He already knew. A second man stepped out from the passenger side, larger, heavier, his posture loose but alert. He scanned the horizon, eyes lingering on the gas station in the distance, the truck parked nearby, The emptiness all around them. No witnesses. No cover. "You own this land?" the first man asked. "I work it," Thomas replied. The man smiled faintly. "That'll do." He took a few steps closer, stopping just outside Thomas's reach. Up close, his politeness felt artificial, stretched thin over something harder. "We represent some people who have an interest in this area. Normally, we handle matters quietly. You've made that difficult." Lily shifted beside Thomas. "We didn't take anything." The man nodded as if considering this. "No, you didn't. That's why we're having a conversation instead of a problem." The second man chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. They spoke plainly after that. They knew Thomas's name. They knew the station was behind on payments. They knew Lily didn't live here and wouldn't be staying long. They knew exactly where the hatch was and what lay beneath it. There was no threat spoken aloud, but every word carried weight. "Forget what you saw," the man said. "Forget the road. Forget the tunnel. We'll make sure your bills stop stacking up." Thomas felt anger rise beneath the fear. "And if I don't?" The man removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were cold and calculating. "Then someone else will inherit this property sooner than you expect." The vehicle left as quietly as it had arrived, rolling back toward the ridge and disappearing from sight. The desert returned to silence, but it was a different silence now. Tense. Watchful. That night, Thomas could not sleep. Every sound outside the station felt amplified. He waited until Lily's breathing settled into a steady rhythm before moving. He grabbed a flashlight, his jacket, and the old revolver he kept in a drawer he rarely opened. The tunnel entrance greeted him like a held breath. He descended alone, sealing the hatch behind him. The darkness felt thicker this time, more oppressive, as if the place resented being disturbed. He followed the corridor deeper than before, past the containers, toward the equipment he had only glimpsed earlier. The hum was louder now. The chamber at the end of the tunnel housed rows of machinery, cables feeding into metal racks stacked against the walls. Dust covered most surfaces, but not all. Some panels were clean, recently handled. Small indicator lights blinked steadily, green and amber, patient and alive. Thomas ran his hand along a cable, following it to its source. The equipment was old but sophisticated, designed to relay, amplify, and conceal signals. He did not need to understand every detail to grasp the purpose. This place had been used to move information quietly, away from oversight, away from questions. It explained why the road had been erased instead of repurposed, why no one wanted attention drawn here. As he stood there, absorbing the truth of it, the generator behind him coughed once, then steadied. Thomas froze, every muscle tight. Someone else was here. Footsteps echoed faintly from the corridor. Thomas killed the flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering. Voices drifted closer, low and conversational. Two men, maybe more. They moved with confidence, unhurried, like people walking through a space they owned. "They were here," one voice said. "Tracks are fresh." "So?" another replied. "They'll take the money or they won't. Either way, it gets handled." Thomas waited, breath shallow, until the footsteps passed into the chamber. He caught glimpses of them between machines, their silhouettes outlined by the dim indicator lights. They inspected the equipment methodically, checking connections, reading gauges. "These systems shouldn't still be active," one of them muttered. "They are," the other answered. "That's why we're here." Thomas understood then that compliance would not protect him. The offer had been a formality, nothing more. Witnesses were inconvenient, and inconvenient things were removed. He waited until they moved on, then slipped back the way he came, every step careful, controlled. When he emerged into the open night, the desert air felt sharp and clean, almost painful in his lungs. By morning, The pressure returned. The black vehicle came back, joined by another. This time, there was no pretense of casual conversation. They stood in a loose semicircle near the station, hands visible, relaxed, in a way that made Thomas uneasy. "You've had time to think," the first man said. "We expect an answer." Thomas glanced at Lily, who stood in the doorway behind him, pale but resolute. He knew then what he had to do, and the weight of it settled heavily in his chest. He nodded slowly. "I'll show you everything." The men smiled, satisfied. None of them noticed the quiet resolve in Thomas's eyes, or the fact that his gaze lingered not on them, but on the road itself, stretching away toward the horizon, hiding secrets that would not stay buried forever. The pressure did not lift after Thomas agreed to cooperate. If anything, it tightened. The men stayed near the station, never stepping too close, never leaving entirely. Their vehicles came and went at odd hours, engines cutting through the quiet like reminders that time was running out. Lily packed her things that afternoon, not because Thomas asked her to, but because she understood what staying would mean. She hugged him tightly before leaving, her grip lingering as if she were memorizing the feel of him. Neither of them said goodbye out loud. When night fell, the desert cooled, and the stars sharpened into hard points of light. Thomas waited until the station lights were off, and the men had retreated to their vehicles. He moved with care, carrying only what he needed. The revolver stayed behind. It would not help him where he was going. He returned to the hatch alone. The descent into the tunnel felt different now, heavier, as if the place recognized his intent. The hum of the equipment was steady, patient, unaware. Thomas moved through the corridor without hesitation, passing the containers and sealed doors, his mind focused on a single task. He did not intend to steal anything. He intended to end it. The control chamber greeted him with its faint lights and low vibrations. Thomas studied the layout carefully, recalling what he had seen the night before. The system relied on a central relay, housed within a reinforced unit near the far wall. Cables converged there, feeding power and signal into a core that kept the entire network alive. Old technology, but built to last. He worked quickly, methodically. Years of repairing engines had taught him how systems failed, how they could be persuaded to stop without dramatic explosions or obvious sabotage. He loosened connections, rerouted power, disabled redundancies. The generator sputtered once, then again, before settling into an uneven rhythm. The hum faltered. Footsteps echoed behind him. Thomas turned as two figures entered the chamber, weapons drawn but lowered. Their expressions shifted from confidence to irritation as they took in the scene. The blinking lights dimmed, some going dark altogether. "You don't know what you're doing," one of them said. Thomas met his gaze calmly. "I know exactly what I'm doing." The man took a step forward, then stopped as the generator coughed violently. Warning lights flared, then died. The room fell into near darkness, lit only by emergency indicators. Thomas stepped back, hands raised. "You wanted me cooperative," he said. "This is as cooperative as it gets." They lunged for him, but the floor shuddered beneath their feet as the system failed completely. The hum died. The lights went out. Silence flooded the chamber, absolute and final. Thomas ran. He did not stop until he reached the ladder, climbing fast, lungs burning. When he emerged, the desert greeted him with cold night air and the distant sound of raised voices. Shouts echoed from below as alarms that no longer worked failed to summon help. He drove away from the station without looking back. By the time the sun rose, federal vehicles were already on the move. Thomas had contacted a journalist weeks earlier, someone who specialized in stories that powerful people preferred. Buried. Coordinates, photos, recordings. Enough to force attention where silence had reigned. Route 117 was sealed within days. The station was closed under investigation. The tunnel was classified, its existence officially denied even as armed guards appeared where dust had once blown freely. Thomas Reed disappeared. 6 months later, the desert remained unchanged to anyone passing on the new highway. The old road was barely visible now, swallowed by sand and neglect. But sometimes, late at night, travelers swore they saw a faint glow beneath the ground, near where Route 117 once ran. A brief flicker, a dying signal. Some secrets, even buried deep, refuse to stay silent forever. Not every secret wants to stay buried. Some are erased on purpose. If you enjoyed the story, like and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from.